Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first I would like, as usual, to thank for the 12th or even 13th time Jerry Pollock for invitation to this conference. And I'll try to make my talk even more provocative than Jerry made it. Because he asked the question, what is the connection between water and flight? And I will try to ask the question, what is the connection between the evolution of life on Earth and bizarre properties of water, which we are discussing in these conferences. So the title is on the advent of the new evolutionary synthesis in biology, and subtitle is should the new evolutionary synthesis acknowledge the memory of water and the tendency to self-organization of aqueous systems? I am very happy that this morning already we had several brilliant lectures of Professor Montagnier, of Wu Kim, H. Kim, of Romana Tsenkova, who already introduced several very important problems which I'm going to discuss from a little different perspective. Like the Professor Wu Kim, he claimed that we need now the shift in a paradigm in the 21st century, which would acknowledge the memory of water. And I also want to speak about the change in, if I manage, change in two paradigms. One paradigm is the paradigm about evolution, which is changing now exactly during these years. And the second paradigm is paradigm about the properties of water, which is the major substance and probably the major field in the universe. I would start from the paradigm of biological evolution. And I simply will tell some things which probably are known to some biologists who are present here, and I beg their pardon if I will tell some things which are not known to physicists and chemists who are here about the new changes which take place in the evolutionary theory, which is the foundation of biology. These new changes which take place in evolutionary foundation of biology are based on the following premises. First is Lamarckian craving for perfection. I will, in few details, will explain it a little later. But he is insisting, Lamarck, more than 200 years ago, was insisting that living systems possess intrinsic activity, ensuring their perfection. Or perfection and self-organization, for me, now are two words which are very similar, which describe very similar phenomena. And the second one, which is much less known, is the Darwinian idea of epigenetic inheritance, which he called pangenesis. Darwinian not only acknowledged that living systems are capable to inherit adaptive acquired characteristics, but he developed a kind of hypothesis of the mechanism, how it is done. And this hypothesis he called pangenesis. And my heretic claim will be that both these premises, which are now more and more acknowledged by biologists, stem from the coherent activity of water systems. But in order to go further and go to my claim, I would like just to describe where do we stand now. Where do all the faculties of biology, of students of biology, what knowledge they give from their professors? Until now, and for about 100 years, the synthetic theory of evolution, or neo-Darwinism, was considered to be the theoretical foundation of biology. And this, you have big and many big volumes which describe this synthetic theory of evolution, but in a nutshell, it is based on the Darwinian principle of natural selection and of the fittest, which originates in the frame of neo-Darwinism, of hereditable variations of chance mutations of genetic material. And by genetic material, we mean just molecules of DNA, of which Professor Montagnier was talking here. What is natural selection? People know this, all people practically know this word, but the definition of natural selection was given by Charles Darwin, and not many biologists know this strict definition of natural selection. So here is the citation from Darwin's Origin of Species, that struggle for existence amongst all organic beings inevitably follows from their high geometrical powers of increase, or better to say, from their strive for multiplication in geometrical progression. This is the doctrine of Malthus applied to the whole animal and vegetable kingdoms. And from these premises it follows that as many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, because there is a deficiency of resources for this tremendous multiplication. It follows that any being, if it vary, however slightly, in any manner profitable to itself, will have a better chance of surviving. And this is practically naturally, they will be naturally selected. So this definition of natural selection follows from the tendency of multiplication in geometrical progression, which doesn't follow only from few observations, and the deficiency of resources. The question, if it vary, however slightly, in any manner profitable to itself, what is the reasons of these variations? And later on, I'll tell in details what Darwin meant by the source of these variations. But Darwinism in nearly 100 years ago was replaced by neo-Darwinism, synthetic theory of evolution, which is different from the original Darwin theory. Because the Malthusian basis of the struggle for existence is not mentioned in synthetic theory of evolution, so the drive is for this selection is simply absent, and variability of those who may fit and who will not fit is due only to random non-directional mutations, meaning that evolution of the natural selection is the natural selection of the lucky ones, who are happy to have by chance mutations which allow him to fit into the existing conditions. He will survive and multiply. Who is unlucky, he will disappear. Now, variability is due to only random non-directional selection, wherefrom it follows. Just a few minutes later, I'll tell you that at that time, at the beginning of the 19th century, and during the whole 19th century, people believed that that living things can acquire characteristics during their lifetime and transmit them to their progeny. But at the beginning of the 20th century, at the end of the 19th, 20th century, August Weismann, the very outstanding German biologist, he proved, as most biologists thought, that such inheritance is absent. He was cutting tails to many generations of rats, and still rats were born with tails. So it was the ultimate proof for all the biologists, most of them, I also studied this, that the problem of inheritance of acquired characteristic is absent. And contemporary biology is essentially reduced to molecular biology based on the central dogma proclaimed by Francis Crick. So this dogma, which was proclaimed originally, is that hereditary information moves only from genes to body cells and never in reverse. And hereditary information moves only from germ-like cells to somatic cells. So no information which organism gets during his lifetime can go to germ-like cells. And in 1970, Francis Crick even stated that the discovery just of one type of a cell which could carry out any of the transfers from protein to DNA, or from function to DNA, from protein to RNA, or from protein to protein, would shake the whole intellectual basis of molecular biology. Today, we may state that Francis Crick was correct. The original first dogma of molecular biology is shaken. And the journal Nature, which is the most important journal for all of us, in October 2014, even for it's a very rare event when there was a dispute. Does evolutionary theory needs a rethink? And it has shown that there is a big, many biologists claim that yes, urgently. Others said no, all is well. Why evolutionary biology needs a rethink? Because in our view, this gene-centric focus fails to capture the full gamut of processes that direct evolution, and missing pieces include what is written here, and one of the major ones is how organisms transmit more than genes across generations, extragenetic, epigenetic inheritance. Now, there are I would like to say a few words about the adventures of the phenomenon of inheritance of acquired characteristics. The word adaptive characteristics should be added here, because in Russian we say благоприобретенные, that is the characteristics which promote the further development of the organism. So this inheritance of acquired characteristic was in mainstream science. It was noted in the 19th century. It turned into pseudoscience for the whole 20th century. And there were many dramatic events in the discussion if the acquired characteristic may be inherited or not. I will not just go into details about the suicide of Austrian biologist Kammerer, about the dramatic history of genetics and, as they say, pseudogenetics in the Soviet Union. And by the end of the 20th century, it was practically fixed that acquired characteristics cannot be, this is pseudoscience. Now, in the 1917, we may state that it is again the mainstream. So the complete shift, the change in the paradigm in the evolutionary theory already took place. Now, I can give you only a couple of highly advertised experimental data which illustrates the epigenetic inheritance of acquired characteristics. The paper of Randy Gertl in 2003 shows that nutritional effects upon the parents may be acquired by their progeny and the progeny of the progeny. So what we eat, in fact, there is such a saying, we are what we eat. We can add it. Our children are what we eat, and our grandchildren are also what we eat. I will not go into details. I just illustrate with this slide this highly advertised and very strongly proved phenomenon. Another also striking phenomenon, epigenetic inheritance of behavioral traits. If the male is conditioned by Pavlovian means, for example, he is given a small electrical shock and at the same time he is giving a smell of the neutral gas, like acetophenone, which is not poisonous at all. And this Pavlovian instinct is developed in this, the reflex is developed in this animal. And he is mated with the naive female. The progeny, first generation, begin to feel shock only when the order is given. There is no electrical shock at all. And even the second generation are also have this fear to this particular order, though they've never met any electrical shocks from this order. So it shows also that many of our behavioral features, conditions may be heredited from our parents and even more strongly from our grandparents. I would just simply state that by now the inheritance of acquired characteristics is experimentally proved by many dozens of papers. The idea of this inheritance of acquired characteristics is usually ascribed to Lamarck. And I will not go into details. Everybody knows this mocking example about the giraffe whose neck became so long because giraffes were leaning in order to eat the higher and higher leaves on the trees. Everybody knows this. And in textbooks, even the most modern textbooks, it is written that this theory is incorrect, but significant because Lamarck was the first scientist who recognized that organism has changed over time. But in fact, it was not the idea of Lamarck that acquired characteristic could be inherited. That was just idea of all biologists of that time. And it was Charles Darwin who tried to suggest a theory which explains how the acquired characteristic could be inherited. Why he decided to suggest this theory? Because, of course, he believed in hard heredity. For example, cats do not give birth to dogs and vice versa. But during the lifetime, the cats and dogs and plants and all other living things, they use and disuse organs. And this may be inherited. There is a phenomenon in agriculture of graft hybridization, which is not explained by hard heredity, by the central dogma of molecular biology. Telegony, development, even regeneration cannot be explained by the, so to say, hard heredity, by heredity fixed in genome. And Darwin assumed that there are another means of transmission of these new characteristics from soma, which is which is related to the environment, to germ cells. So here is, in the nutshell, the essence of his pangenesis theory. Suppose something like a toxin stimulates the liver cells to remove the toxin. The liver produces gemmules, very, very small particles, which contain detoxifying information. Generals in circulation get into circulation, fuse with reproductive cells, for example, with sperm cells, and these reproductive cells carry these altered gemmules into next generation. These newly altered gemmules have informed the development of the new liver in the already progeny, and it may go on in this next and next generations. Darwin understood that this idea may be not accepted by his peers. And he said that pangenesis will be called a mad dream, but at the bottom of my mind, I think it contains a great truth. And I would say, from my point of view, here is a paradox. His theory of natural selection is dead now. But his theory of pangenesis, which was refuted even by his followers, devoted followers, turns out to be a prophetic one. Now, in the 21st century, we may state that pangenesis is revived. During the last 2 decades or even less, there appeared a completely new branch in cellular biology, a branch about the existence of extracellular vesicles, which are vehicles for intergenerational transmission of acquired traits. There are many dozens or probably hundreds of papers that all cells are capable to produce and to shed nanoparticles, which, as a matter of fact, have the diameter from 40 nanometers to 100 mostly, but sometimes even more. And I just already begin to shift into the water field, which is very close to nano-associates and coherent domains in their dimension, that they shed these particles, and these particles get into biofluids. These are jelly-like particles. These are not solid matter because they can be dried out. And they contain specific mixtures of lipids, proteins, and especially of variable RNAs, non-coding RNAs, small RNAs, some other RNAs. And what is most important, that these microvesicles, they contain not the average contents of the cytoplasm, but they contain, for example, those RNAs which originate in cell and tissue in response to the particular environmental factors. For example, this environmental stress causes alterations in small RNA composition of these extracellular vesicles. And here on this picture, one can see that the illustration of this fear inheritance. The fear originates in brain. Brain sheds extracellular vesicles into circulation, and these extracellular vesicles, they get from somatic cells to germ cells or to gametes, and this RNA-induced modification in germ cells epigenome, and RNA delivered to zygote upon fertilization. And that's why I asked a question to Luc Montagnier what he thinks about the probability of the appearance of new and new RNA in response to the few ones which appear, for example, in brain in response to the environmental stress. Because it is very difficult to imagine that brain will send so many these extracellular vesicles to gonads in order to fertilize all the spermatozoids. It's impossible. So it should be some mean for multiplication of these newly synthesized RNAs. So Charles Darwin said in 1871, the supposed gemellus must be much more minute than the smallest particles that can be seen by the highest magnifying powers of these days. And these Darwin's descriptions were visionary, as the properties of gemellus proposed 150 years ago appear to match well with those of extracellular vesicles. Thus, these gemellus or extracellular vesicles ensure body memory, its development and transmission of actual acquired characteristics to progeny. However, currently the major attention is paid to bioorganic molecular composition of them, RNA, protein, lipids, while, like any living matter, they consist mainly of water, and without associated water memory, none of these features may be realized. And now we return from Darwin to Lamarck, 50 years before Darwin. And his concept of evolution was no less visionary, even from the point of view of water properties. According to Lamarck, the responsiveness of living things to external factors, which produce now these gemellus or extracellular vesicles, is provided by the nature of the chemical material of the living things. I made this discovery for myself when I began to study Lamarck's works. And he writes that the chemical material of living things is gelatinous and mucilaginous matter, which is not just water, but it is gels, cells, and engines of life, which Jerry Pollack wrote in his book 15 years ago. And by self-organization, dynamics fluxes of subtle fluids, electricity, and heat. So this gelatinous matter, it should be organized by external, now what we call the electromagnetic or physical fields. So that shape this water in a way that leads to its self-maintenance and amplification. So Lamarck's concept of evolution is essentially dynamical. He insists that evolution is the result of the internal strive of living things for progressive development. Here is a citation from Lamarck. And he says that all living things, all animal life, with the power, that means potential, to make organization gradually more complex and to bring increasing complexity and perfection to their organization. So what is this perfection? That is what we call now self-organization. And he wrote that once gelatinous matter is exposed to fluxes of environmental fields, the matter self-organizes into living, self-sustaining entities. It was written more than 200 years ago. He wrote that once gelatinous matter is exposed to fluxes of environmental caloric and electricity, the matter self-organizes into living, self-sustaining properties. I have 7 minutes. I have here my watches. Now, according to him, water, that is his citation from Lamarck. And now I give the essence of works of Emilio Del Giudice and Gerald Pollack, that water is able to self-organize at mesoscopic, microscopic, and nanoscopic levels. So here are this illustration of self-organization of water on macroscopic levels. I think that the origination of these vortices in water and air is the good example of self-organization. But water is able to self-organize on mesoscopic and microscopic levels as well, which was discovered, in fact, by Jerry Pollack. So liquid crystalline easy water, that's organized water, spontaneously emerges near hydrophilic surfaces. And I would say that near the Jerry Pollack's hydrophilic surface, now a lot of self-organized other water was emerged now. So this, I would say that experimental evidence obtained by now indicates that all natural aqueous systems possess the following properties. They are represented by coexisting liquid crystalline coherent water and quasi-chaotic bulk water, that is easy water and bulk water. There is a charge separation between these two phases, which is ensured, and that electron flow from coherent water to oxygen present in bulk water is provided. All these properties give the intrinsic activity to all aqueous systems, which are the essence of all living systems. And aqueous systems are able to transform external low-density energy into organized, coherent, free energy, self-organization. These properties of water, in fact, explain in general the bird flight, and not only the bird flight, but swimming of fishes at the bottom of the oceans. So this is the necessary condition for water self-organization is the availability of enough energy, thermal energy or infrared or other, to support liquid state of water. And the same condition is needed for the spontaneous emergence, existence, and self-organization, evolution, development of living systems in all the forms known on Earth. So we now return back to the originators of these ideas, which we simply develop now and experimentally prove. That the intrinsic activity of aqueous systems endows animal life with the power to make organization gradually more complex and bring increasing complexity and perfection. That is self-organization. Evolution or development is self-organization, which is the intrinsic property of all aqueous systems. And the intrinsic capacity of aqueous systems to change their state in response to external irritations and stay in this changed state, which we call memory of water, or better to say memory of aqueous systems, is the basis of Darwin pangenesis for the origination of liquid crystalline gemmules, capable to transfer new traits from the parents to progeny. So, from my point of view, without water properties, which were discussed in this society for more than decade, they may explain many things which are not explained in biology, in physics and chemistry, from bird flight to evolution of life on Earth. Thank you.